Good afternoon, everyone joining us from the Gulf, and a very good morning and good evening to our international audience joining us from outside the region for the 7th installment of the RIBA Gulf Live Lunch Talks, which have been reinstated for 2022. Today's session is the first for this year, so a huge welcome to everyone joining us. I'm Aslina Bulmer, the RIBA Director of International. Over the last 2 years, the RIBA Gulf Office has been working to support the 7 countries in the region, including the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, and Jordan. And I'm pleased to have members joining us from all 7 countries today, and also our international audience. I know we have people joining us right now from the USA, China, France, New Zealand, and of course, United Kingdom, just to name a few. The RIBA Gulf Live Lunch Talks were designed to expand knowledge on projects and ideas from across the region. We held 6 sessions last year on a wide variety of projects from within the region. Today's session is pretty special. It will focus on the integral part of the Expo 2020 Dubai, the center stage of the Wasl Dome, which is often referred to as the heart of the Expo. It also happens that today is the last day of the 6-month Expo, so the session is doubly special. I had the privilege of going to Expo last November, and I was taken aback of how wonderful it was and how magical it was too. Now, moving to today's session specifically, I am very pleased to introduce Tim Leigh, the Managing Director of Stage 1, who is joining us from snowy Yorkshire. Believe it or not, it's not warm here at all. We will start today's session hearing from Tim on what it was like to build the central stage in the Wasl Plaza, and then move on to an interactive section. Really, today is about being interactive with you as always. So please, can I ask you to send as many thoughts and questions for our speaker, and send them at any time during the session in the chat bar alongside, and we will get them in the last 15 minutes. But to kick things off, Tim will be discussing the transition of the Wasl Plaza from a complex construction site to a platform for breathtaking performances. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tim.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Aslina. My name is Tim Leigh. I'm the Managing Director of Stage 1 Creative Services. We are a creative manufacture and construction company based in Yorkshire in the UK. We employ 120 individuals, and we turn over generally about 25 million sterling each year. We were lucky enough to be invited to pitch for a project at the very heart of the Expo. We were encouraged to bid for the creation, installation and operation of the stage engineering packages in the Wasl Plaza. As Lena suggested, those of you who will have seen the ginormous size of the whole Expo site, and at its beating heart is the Wasl Plaza. The Wasl Plaza is a really interesting structure in its own right. It is 67.5 meters tall, and its internal volume is almost 750,000 cubic meters. Whilst it's an amazing architectural structure in its own right, our challenge was to transform this structure into a theatre, a place where performances could be created not just on opening and closing, but on every single day of the Expo's operation. The construction of the Wasl Dome itself was incredible. Now, I have to hold my hand up and say we played no part in this. One of the lead designers was Tim Leigh, an Italian company, but was aided and abetted by construction companies really all over the world. This is a very interesting photograph, and you can actually see the crown of the Wasl Dome being hoisted into place there. It really was a magnificent piece of structural engineering. It's very hard from these pictures to get a sense of scale, and hopefully as we go through the presentation you will start to see quite how big this is when you see the scale of individuals climbing in amongst it. There were some beautiful aerial shots. The Wasl Dome itself is actually the biggest freestanding projection surface in the whole world. You can see in that particular shot that some of the open portals are starting to be filled in that shot with projection material, and there were many hundreds of projectors on the inside surface of the dome, that cast very complex, very elaborate and very beautiful images to supplement people performances in the structure itself. Once the Wasl Dome was created, the projection surfaces were fitted out across the whole internal surface. You can see the oculus in that shot, and that really was a focal point for all the performances. And in fact, in a few slides, you will see that's where our riggers began to install pulleys and diverters for our performer winches. So they had to climb up each day into the Wasl Plaza. The record was about 10 minutes from ground to oculus, and you can see at the very top of that shot the gantry that they used to climb up there. There were two gantries, one on the inside and one on the outside of the structure, and these were actually motorized gantries, and they could convey themselves very slowly all the way around 360 degrees of the inside and the outside of the surface. Now, they weren't quick, they took a long time to make that journey, but it was a very useful access mechanism for our operatives to use during the install and operation process. And another beautiful drone shot looking down into what was our stage at the very base of the Wasl Plaza there. Again, you're starting to get a sense of scale of really quite how big this thing was. And this is a lovely shot of one of our riggers beginning his journey at the start of the day, climbing almost 70 meters to the very summit of the Wasl Plaza itself. The good news is that mostly the weather is good. Sometimes it's very hot for climbing and making the journey, but the weather works in our favor in terms of keeping our equipment largely dry. Wind can sometimes be a problem, and certainly the dust in the atmosphere also presents us with a few operational challenges, but thus far we have only had good successes within the Wasl Plaza. This is a lovely shot. I'm always very keen when I'm presenting only to use high quality photography. It's not always easy when you're working at height to get such high quality photography. We had rigger support 24 hours a day. This shot is taken at night, and two of our riggers, one leg rather precariously poised over the side of the oculus there. You'll be pleased to know that these guys were safe and harnessed, but you can start to see these guys rigging access points for the diversion of the performer hoists around the perimeter of the oculus. They actually had to set off on a very perilous journey. Again, not a great shot, but you can see two riggers performing what's known as a Tiraleon Traverse to get to the very center of the Wasl Plaza in terms of rope access work. And this just demonstrates really how architecture, when something is being designed, it's designed as a beautiful structure, and the thought went into the gantry in terms of getting people up there, up to the oculus for operational reasons. But in actual fact, getting to the very center of the oculus wasn't thought about and did require very skilled, very brave operation on behalf of our riggers. Really interesting how a structure begins to transform itself into a theatre, into a performance venue. One of the first things we did was install a truss, and the truss was suspended in the middle of the Wasl Dome, and it was suspended from our winch lines. The truss was used for further performer winches and audio arrays, so we had to supply power and data into this suspended truss. You'll notice the dog leg, the truss with the cables running through it, top right there, and then a sock which trails the cables down to connect to the mains environment. So this is it set out in real life there. So really quite a heavy truss. Interestingly, when the engineers were originally designing the Wasl Dome, no thought had been put into suspending additional weight into this structure. So we had to work very hard to keep items suspended from the Wasl Dome as light as possible because there was very little overhead for additional loading. And from time to time you get unexpected surprises. In addition to the winches in the truss, we had some surprising visitors. Here is some wildlife that decided to create a nest, and our riggers left it there for a day or so and then were doubly surprised and delighted when they were presented with a gift, a chick hatching out of an egg. Now, we left the nest there just long enough for the chick to hatch, and both mother and baby were safe, you'll be pleased to know. But all of this just points to the fact that whenever you are working, doing unusual projects, there will always be unexpected surprises. In addition to the truss, we created an elaborate kinetic stage. This is about 25 meters in diameter. Ramps for performer access. The stage surface itself was covered in LED. It was a painted surface and had to accommodate lively performances. But in the middle of this was a revolve, so a mechanized revolving donut that performers could stand on to produce their theatre in the round. And then there were 28 actuated traps at the almost dead center of these, which were actuated, which lifted up like that, and these were used as a mechanism for revealing scenery from below stage as part of the performance. And at the very center of the stage was a stage lift which lifted performers and scenery up from the pit. So you can start to see here that we built the stage in our workshops in Yorkshire. This is the 25-meter diameter steel framework built and welded at our facility in Yorkshire, and then taken apart and put into shipping containers and sent overland to Dubai. Everything that we make in our business is made in Yorkshire and then is shipped to all four corners of the world. So when we're designing, we have to make sure that these items can be broken up and packaged in a way that they can be put into containers, sent over land, over sea, and then sent and reassembled at the destination. And then when we get to site, we have to build it in fairly short order. You can see one of our operatives there, young Kevin, tightening up the hinges of the actuators. And you'll see the surprise inside there. This is a planet in a compressed state. The concentric rings you'll see there, which are covered in LED. This scenic element was created by another company, a company called New Substance, who are coincidentally also based in Yorkshire. But they packaged their compressed planet into our stage, and we connected our winch lines to it, and we lifted it up as part of the performance. In addition to the planet, we created scenic elements. You'll see this is a dune stage, reminiscent of dunes in the UAE desert, and this revolved as part of the opening ceremony performance in the Wasl Plaza at opening. In addition to creating all of the steelwork and scenery, we have developed a very sophisticated technology package. It's called Q-Motion, but this helps control, drive and operate winches, lifts, revolves. A very clever piece of technology, all driven effectively on a PC-based system from the control room, and controls the speed and timing, effectively fires the cues for the performance. So this is where our operators will be sat tonight at 4 this afternoon UK time, 7 o'clock local time, and they will be controlling the performance with bated breath. Just a few details you'll see on the left hand side of the screen. There is some data on a large screen. This is data from load cells, so where we suspend items from our flying system, we measure the forces applied to the lines to make sure that nothing unexpected is going on. And here's a great shot taken from above of the planet being revealed from understage. You'll notice our trap doors are open there, and then the planet is hoisted up into position at the very center of the space in the Wasl Plaza. So this appeared as a burning ball of fire, and then resolved to show the map of the globe, this beautiful planet that we all live on. In addition to opening ceremonies, there were shows every single day in the Wasl Plaza, and that presented us with a challenge of sorts in that we were never quite sure when we set out on this interesting journey quite what those performances would be. So again, from an architectural point of view, we were invited after the Wasl Dome was built to turn it into a theatre for performances that hadn't yet been designed. But that all adds to the challenge, and some of the parameters that we had to give the creatives were all around speed of travel, weight of travel, time that they had for rehearsal. This is a lovely shot as part of the Jubilee celebrations of a pearl diver who does a quick costume change in mid-air, flown on our flying system to become an astronaut. Really quite one of the most delightful things I've ever seen in creative theatre. And there were shows every day. Some of them were relatively simple floor performances. You'll notice there are all sorts of effects, beautiful audio in the Wasl Dome itself, beautiful projection, but also some very inventive creative floor shows there. And you can see that there were smoke machines deployed underneath our stage as well to add to the overall artistic effect. We even flew a falcon. There was some really beautiful creative scenic items built and imagined for Expo, and it was really great to see how these would integrate with our flying system to give absolutely world-class performances. And indeed, there was old-fashioned rock and roll quite recently, about 4 weeks ago now. Coldplay were invited to stage a live concert within the Wasl Dome. And in actual fact, as a concert venue, it is remarkable, the quality of the audio and the fact that all of this is presented to an audience in the round is really rather magnificent. We were very lucky to work there. So that's all I have for you, an absolute whistle-stop tour through 6 months of creative development, stage engineering and technology. It's been an absolute delight and a privilege to be involved. There is a plan for legacy, which the Expo organisation is working out, and we look forward to remaining involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That was very interesting, and it's very interesting to see the process of creating that central stage. As I said, I was there in November last year. I was blown away. The immersive experience in the plaza was very much delightful. I generally was so impressed. I wish I had more time to spend. You feel that you are in a different place. It takes you somewhere so serene and beautiful. I was there when they had pigeons flying everywhere, and it was wonderful. And then that's obviously much of it thanks to the work that you and your team have been doing. So we're going to just move to a bit of interactive session, a couple of questions from me. Indulge me on this, audience, as well. I know Stage 1 have been involved in various expos. 2015, you were in Milan. You brought to life the UK's award-winning Pavilion, the Hive, designed by Wolfgang Buttress, which now I believe resides in Kew Gardens in London. And 2017 in Expo in Astana, Stage 1 provided complex engineering services when designing the manufacturing 7 stages lifts to deliver various shows. So what was different in the design process in this project at Expo compared to previous Expos, and what were some successes and challenges you faced with the Wasl Plaza?
Well, let's start with the challenges, and I want to be really clear. It's been a delightful project to work on, but of course it was a challenge that faced everyone, which was the pandemic. Of course, this is still called Expo 2020, and it didn't get going until 2021, and the delay and uncertainty around quite how Expo would be produced presented some planning challenges for us, and we were about to start on this project, and then the project was put on hold quite sensibly, but there was some nervousness about whether the Expo project would go ahead at all. I'm very pleased that it did. I'm sure everyone involved is very pleased that it did go ahead and was produced beautifully, but the uncertainty in the initial phases was a challenge. I think one of the unusual things for us in terms of an Expo is its duration. So the very fact that it has an operational window of 6 months means that you have to have huge commitment from your team. We have guys who've been on site since very early last year. They've been away from their homes and their families in the UK for more than a year, and that takes huge dedication. I'm very lucky to be supported by people who work with me who are able to make that sacrifice. Beyond that, it's always very interesting to work on a busy site. We do quite a lot of work at Olympic ceremonies, and there is a lot of overlay work, lots of contractors working in the space, but even those sites are nothing like as busy or as large as an expo site. So this really was a phenomenal piece of planning for the organisers, and Stage One can't take any credit for that. Of course, we were involved in the planning process, but our involvement was just one tiny part of really a giant undertaking, and that of itself is incredible.
Thank you, Tim. I mean, we talked about this before. You mentioned it. The Wasl Plaza is in the heart of Expo 2020. As you walk in through the main entrance, the first thing you see, if you come into the right entrance, I know there's a few entrances, but the main entrance, the first thing you see is Wasl Plaza, and you can't miss it. You can't miss how impressive it is. It's hosted different shows. You mentioned the concert. I've mentioned the immersive experience, and every day there was something different, and the feedback has been amazing. What was the thought process followed to create this project, specifically since it had to host over 100 different shows, each with different payloads, different technical requirements, different duty cycles, and there's just so many elements that you had to consider?
There are, and again, that was one of the challenges. As I mentioned in my presentation, we were creating a theatre without fully knowing what the performances were going to be. Now, that of itself isn't hugely unusual, but it does create some challenges, because of course the creative agencies that we work alongside want to do something innovative and magnificent and really challenging. They like to push the boundaries of what is possible. I guess there were some constraints. There were constraints in terms of the envelope of the Wasl Plaza itself, and the payloads and the capabilities of our flying system, and indeed the duty cycles that we were able to execute against in terms of our staging. But we work very well with these creative agencies, and they ask us to do phenomenal things, and we do most of them. Where we can't deliver against some of their requirements, we work with them, we collaborate to try and find different ways of doing things. I guess what I will say is that live performances are nerve-wracking, and in a live environment, there is a lot to go wrong. So it's working with people who are brave, but also mindful that actually we get one shot at a show, and it's not like recording something for TV and then being able to edit it in post-production. It's got to be right every time, and where it's not, as long as there is contingency and we run safe performances, then everyone goes home happy.
No, thank you for that. Another thing you mentioned, which was the challenge you had, was COVID, the pandemic, and the delay it caused. It was meant to open October 2020, the Expo, and it's been delayed quite significantly due to the pandemic. How did the pandemic affect the construction process specifically? And did any of your design process have to be updated to work with the new timeline?
Yeah, we were effectively delayed for a year, and so in terms of rescheduling, that was just a pushing back of the program. So that of itself wasn't difficult. I talked before about the uncertainty. The uncertainty came from us really not knowing whether this was going to go ahead or not, and we used quite a large volume of raw material on this product, and certainly the supply chain issues that come with shortages of supply of timber and sheet material, and indeed steel, presented a problem. But we have a good enough network of suppliers to overcome that, and we were very grateful for the support that our suppliers showed us. In terms of general operation, we felt very supported by the Expo team in terms of their rigour around testing, regular testing, and making sure that all staff from all disciplines were properly masked and maintained social distancing. Now, what you have to acknowledge is that sometimes when you're doing an install of this nature, that you can't always remain a metre and a half from your colleagues. Sometimes you have to get very close, particularly when you are handling difficult loads, or you are in rigging environments working alongside colleagues. But we maintained safe, and yes, there were one or two instances of COVID within our crew, but they were handled very sensitively. Our crew were well supported, and whilst it was a nuisance, thank goodness it didn't stop proceedings.
Great. Now, we talk a lot about climate change in the last 4 or 5 years. COP26 last year, we're facing COP27 this year. And Expo has always said from the very beginning, it aspired to deliver one of the most sustainable World Expo, and rightly so. How did you incorporate sustainability into this project? And secondly, what are your thoughts on sustainability in general in the Expo area? I know there's some amazing things. We also have the Sustainability Pavilion, which was also great by one of our RIBA members, Andrew Worley of Grimshaw. So there's a lot of things happening. But in your opinion, you know, what do you see? What are your thoughts on the wider sustainability agenda at Expo?
This agenda is really important for everybody who lives on this planet. Traditionally, industries like ours haven't always been as sustainable as they can be, and there is a glib answer, which is to say that the most sustainable thing is not to run these projects at all. However, actually, these projects determine and deliver the future of our planet. So I think it's right that these events do indeed take place. We are making small steps as an organisation to become more sustainable. We're thinking particularly about the origin of products. We're thinking more about reuse of materials really rather than recycling. Certainly as an individual, I'm very, very keen to reuse materials, and it was interesting that our delivery of the Serpentine Pavilion last year was our most sustainable pavilion ever, in that it reused all the steel in last year's pavilion was reused. It was taken from another project, and it's much better to reuse than necessarily have to reprocess materials and use energy and transport them around the place in so doing. So it is an important agenda. Our industry has been slow to adapt and adopt practices, but we are getting better and better and better. It was a very clear mantra from Expo. A part of our winning the tender to deliver the stage engineering project was to sign up to the requirements from a sustainability point of view from Expo themselves. So it required rigor and it involved many more steps in the bidding and delivery process. And indeed, it probably slowed us down in areas, but actually it is the right thing to do.
No, yes, I think you can see it, not just from Wasl, but everywhere in Expo how sustainability had been thought about. And that's really good to see. Before I go to the question, and we're receiving quite a lot of questions from our audience. Thank you, audience, and keep them coming, please. We want to talk about the legacy. Today is the last day of Expo, which is sad, really, because I really would like to go back and see it, experience it. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is, and I'm so pleased that the opportunity to do so. So the legacy of Expo 2020 has been really important discussion amongst urban planners, architects, and actually, you know, the public in the region and further afield over the last few years. We now know that our Wasl Plaza will be a permanent feature in Dubai, and I think that's an amazing result. What was your thought process in terms of designing for the legacy of the Expo in the region?
That's a good question. When we were commissioned to deliver this particular project, there was very little thought given to legacy, because of course the whole focus is on creating and being ready for opening and delivering through to closing, which is today. However, we have to manufacture to such high requirements and specifications that there really is no problem for our equipment to last beyond today, and we look forward to supporting Expo with their legacy plans. I guess what we have to be mindful of from a mechanical point of view is just making sure that we have sufficient regimes and plans in place for inspection, maintenance and repair of these elements. And again, to hark back to a fine architectural example, the Serpentine Pavilion, these are built as temporary pavilions, but ultimately they are almost always demounted and reinstated elsewhere. So it's interesting, again, from a design perspective, how the demands change from an original objective, which is let's build something amazing for 6 months, to let's now reimagine this installation and keep it potentially forever.
That segued nicely into some of the questions we receive. I think you have answered some of this, but I'm just going to read it out as well. There's Anna and SNS London. Anna says, will our Wasl Dome be maintained and host events after the Expo? We now know it will. And SNS London says, spending time in the Dome was totally awe-inspiring, both by day and by night. What a project to work on. I think there's some jealousy there, Tim. So would be interested to know what happened next with the structure. Will it be retained or disassembled now that Expo is ending? Now, I know it's staying, but I don't know any more further details on that. Is there something you can share with us on that?
I'm afraid I can't, because ultimately it's not my decision, and we are having negotiations right now today about what will happen next. So we do know that stage 1 will be evolved. We do know that there will be some continued performances in the venue. We know that it will be used a little bit less in the very high heat of the summer, but we are commissioned to be involved for at least the next 6 months. And I think it's great because, you know, there are over 20 million people who have visited Expo, and most of them will have been to the Wasl Plaza. And it's such an amazing venue that it would be a shame for it to not be used. It would be a waste culturally. It would be a waste in terms of use of materials and the whole sustainability piece. But actually, it's a beautiful place to be. So yes, I agree. We should continue to use it.
Yeah, I think there's a consensus from our audience today that it definitely should stay in some guise. So that's no two ways. And actually that leads to William's question here, where it says Dubai has announced structures pavilions. We know that will be made permanent. Do you think they have the capability to maintain such structures, especially the Al Wasl Dome?
Yeah, I think the Al Wasl Dome is a structure which will persist. I see no reason for that to be a problem to maintain and keep alive. I want to be clear, we weren't involved in the construction of that, so it may be that I'm wrong about that, but it's such a sturdy, magnificent and bold structure, crafted from steel, that it would be unlikely to be needing repairing anytime soon. So yeah, I see no reason for that to be the case. It does beg a question about what will happen to the pavilions, because of course, again, those pavilions were around the site were built to last 6 months, and so it may be that not all of them are in a state to continue to operate, but that's a question for each of the individual pavilion designers and operators.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a note from Praveen B, just to say that, again, our Wasl Dome is an amazing piece. I just hope it will maintain very well by Dubai, and I'm sure they will, Praveen. I think we all agree on what amazing dome it is. Joseph has asked a question here. Was all support provided by a permanent team based at Expo, or was any extra support required from your facility in Yorkshire throughout the past 6 months?
That's a really good question. So yes, we did have a permanent team on site for the installation and operation, and some of those guys are done with it now. They're tired, they've been out there too long. We do have a process of recycling staff, so bringing them back to the UK to cool off for a few months and then sending them back out. But yes, 1 or 2 individuals have been there for the full stretch, and I'm very delighted and honoured and privileged that they've stuck in and done that. Now, with our stage engineering equipment, we are able to remotely log into that and see how that's performing, and look at the logs and see perhaps what elements might need attention, and we can do that by remotely from the UK. So that's a very useful facility. But generally, we have a recycling of staff. In fact, I was meant to be there for closing today, but COVID has prohibited that, unfortunately. But yes, we regularly recycle staff from the UK and send them to site for periods of time.
Thank you. Another question here is, this is an interesting one. Is there anything you would have done differently now knowing all the shows that took place and central position this stage was in? You know, hindsight's always a fine thing, but there you go.
It is, yeah. One of the, and this is a kind of boring technical issue, but it's interesting nonetheless. One of the issues we sometimes have is with our electronics. Electronics don't generally like operating in temperatures above 40 degrees, and we do cool our systems down. But I think if we were to do this again, maybe we would consider different ways of cooling our electronics. It really does get very hot out there in the midday sun.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't even know you can answer the next question, but we can try. What were the other design proposal for this stage? Can you share some rejected ideas? Was this the first one, the one that you presented at Expo? Was it the first one and the final one, or was it a lot of negotiations in between?
Well, I can't comment on other designs because we weren't party to them. We were only involved at tender stage once the design had been locked. But there is an interesting period beyond winning a tender where the design is developed, and of course you agree to deliver something at tender stage, and this isn't unusual to our industry. Architects all over the place will experience this, but there is a momentum of design which continues past tender, and that's always interesting because you want to support design changes and you want to make the best thing you ever can, but you have to make sure that it's not going to blow the budget, or it's going to be impossible to build, or that you lose all sight of buildability in general. So that process is sometimes a tricky line to tread, and I'm sure it's something that all of our delegates on this call will have experienced in one form or another.
No, I have no doubt, and I think the next question very much follow that thread of challenges, and it is about transportation of materials. Were pieces fabricated in the UK and sent there, or were they actually fabricated locally? And was there any large pieces that were shipped over in particular?
So most of our equipment was shipped from the UK over land and sea. As I mentioned in the presentation, we design everything to be broken down and to be stacked inside shipping containers. We are very well versed at packaging shipping containers beautifully. We do loading plans for each of the containers, so we maximize the density of packing, albeit within weight limits. So we effectively minimize the number of containers that are shipped. So yes, we do get support from local contractors in region, and we've got a very good relationship with a company called VK who help us with local fabrication and joinery support. But actually the accuracy of our machine shop and the accuracy of our metal shop in terms of welding all of this stuff together is something that we like to control from our high-end workshops in the UK, and that's why we choose to manufacture in the UK and then transport. Yeah,
absolutely. And really, the next question is an interesting one, very interesting one for me actually as well. It's about regulations. What regulations remit did this project fall under? Because obviously it was manufactured in the UK and installed in UAE. Were the guidelines that had to be followed with the UAE, or did you focus on UK regulations and rules?
Yeah, so we always build to UK and European directives, and then we make sure that those squeeze in nicely with local considerations, and we do get local checking agents to check our work and certify our work on site. So for this particular project, we were using the TUV machinery directive certifications to just make sure that our machinery was safe, both mechanically, electrically, and for performers. So yeah, we straddle an interesting blend. This isn't necessarily this isn't equipment that the general public will be using, but the general public will have access to it, and we have to be mindful of safety. Nothing is more important in terms of the way we execute projects.
Amazing. Putting you on a spot for the next question. Aside from our Wasl Dome, what was your favourite pavilion and Expo, and why?
Oh gosh, this is like asking me which is my favourite child. I have to say that the UAE pavilion was just magnificent, and that was because inside, though it just felt like a holy place. It was very reminiscent inside of looking up into the dome of a cathedral, and I think you know, as people who are involved in the world of architecture, we are sometimes afraid to admit to the emotions that architecture evokes, but actually inside that very peaceful, magnificent structure, I felt very calm. I felt very calm, despite, you know, delivering difficult engineering projects outside of it. And I think the way that buildings and structures make you feel is really important, and we must never lose sight of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about placemaking, isn't it? It's about how we use the building, not just the look of it. And yeah, I agree. It's a beautiful piece of architecture and building. Now, where do I go with this? Back to technical, I'm afraid, Tim. Talking about Dubai heat, which you and I have both experienced. How did the Dubai heat affect construction process and the mechanics of the systems?
Well, we've got good experience of working in very hot environments, not just in the UAE, but in places like Turkmenistan, which is actually the warmest place we work, where temperatures were regularly north of 50 degrees. Similarly, we've had our equipment operate at -40 at the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018. So that's a range of 90 degrees, and our kit generally performs in both environments. However, I have to say, when it was -40, we did experience problems with diesel freezing for our generators. But yeah, we are used to designing for extreme environments, and as I mentioned before, really it's the electronics that start to suffer when you get north of 40 degrees. There are ways around that. We make sure that there is plenty of airflow. We sometimes introduce air conditioning. Where it gets very cold, we'll put our equipment in insulated shipping containers, and so generally we find a way around. There are always unexpected challenges. Certainly in the heat, some of our power tools start to fail. And we have had, again, in Turkmenistan, where it's very hot, polystyrene scenery that just got so hot with all the solar gain in the sunlight that the polystyrene actually started to melt, which is remarkable because the melting point of polystyrene is north of 200 degrees, but it being out in the sunlight and painted a dark colour, it got very close to that. So there are always challenges with hot temperatures. Often the wind and the desert style storms come to thwart us in terms of covering our equipment, mechanical equipment, in a fine layer of sand, but we deal with it. It's what we do at Stage 1.
And that's very true, actually. Knowing you at Stage 1, that you are not, what you do is quite wide-ranging, and it's fantastic to see you can deal with all sorts of challenges in design, and that's something that we really want to emphasize as well. And this is when the next question really shows your varied expertise. How did you measure payloads and design the system? And I don't even understand this. The next one, it says, do you use Grasshopper, Kangaroo plugins, or is there a different software? You can see I have no technical ability.
We can use Grasshopper. We design from a technology sort of stack point of view. We design all of our mechanical equipment in Autodesk Inventor, and we draw almost everything in 3D, and that's useful to us because we can see how component parts come to form assemblies, and particularly where those are moving. That's a very useful way to be able to do it. So we model everything before we draw it, and then we machine the parts, and then we prototype. We are a big fan of prototyping, and I know prototyping isn't necessarily very sexy, but it's a really useful mechanism. And allied with prototyping is the factory acceptance test. So we will build one component, for example, the actuated traps that you could see there. We can work out from our model that yes, of course, the actuator, given enough juice, should be able to lift and operate properly. But the computer model proving that and then seeing it in the workshop with your own eyes is a different thing entirely. And certainly duty cycle is a big issue for us. So certainly with the automated traps, we're very keen to soak test those, so to run them during the prototyping phase to see what the issues were. And one of the issues that we had was on the hinge, where the trap, because it was effectively a 180-degree hinge, where it fell over, where it was vertical, it was supported quite nicely, but where it fell past vertical, the forces on the hinge behaved in unusual ways. So we worked very hard to machine a hinge which would be reliable for the purposes of the opening ceremony in the Wasl Plaza.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next question is from one of our younger audience today. Any advice for students who would like to focus on the construction and fabrication aspect of architecture? Is engineering a better route to go down as opposed to architecture? Now that's a question to get into this. the work
this is back to choosing my favourite child, architecture or engineering. They are sometimes uneasy bedfellows, but they are two sides of the same coin. I'm absolutely not going to encourage you to either be an architect or an engineer, but I'm going to encourage you to make stuff. Just go and make stuff. And one of my criticisms of young designers coming through, whether they're engineers or architects, is they are absolutely welded to their computer. Go out into your garage, find a workshop, just go and pick some stuff out of a skip and make something from it. And our best engineers are those who have spent time throughout their education making things. And you know what? Most of the things that you make won't be very good or won't work, but there is joy in the learning and joy in the failure. And if you can learn from that and make your next iteration better, then that can only be a good thing. And in fact, some of the best engineers that we've got in our place have never been to university. You know, they have just spent their youth fixing cars or fixing tractors or making things. And it's that hands-on experience which really gives a tenacity and a dedication and a rigor to everything that we deliver. Now, I'm not suggesting that, you know, we can do without proper qualifications. We have those as well at stage one, but it's finding the right blend between the academic approach to design, engineering and architecture and the hands-on making, and finding that sweet spot is really important for us as an organisation.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true indeed, Tim. I'm going to ask a couple more questions before we close the session. One of it is asking, when were you made aware that you were awarded the project? They're just curious as to how much time your team had to start construction, because Expo, I think, had been planned for quite some time, about 10 years.
Yeah. So we were formally contracted in January last year, so January 2021, and we had to deliver for the opening ceremony, which was the day before, the 1st of October, so the very end of September. So effectively we had about 8 months to design, manufacture, ship, install, commission before the opening show. Thank you.
And my final question to you here, and I think it's an apt one to close this, is what's next for you and your Stage 1 team?
Gosh, well, we are always hampered by not really being able to talk about what we're working on for fear of spoiling the big reveal and the surprise. My immediate focus right now is on the show tonight, and I shall heave a sigh of relief when that's finally delivered. And then we'll continue planning about what legacy means for us. We are very pleased to be in the UAE region. We're very fond of working over there, and it doesn't require much effort to encourage our staff to go spend periods out there. We've worked on UAE National Day for several years now, and we're hoping to be involved again this year, although that may or may not happen for us. We're underway with this year's Serpentine Pavilion, which is designed this year by an artist called Theaster Gates in conjunction with Sir David Adjaye's architectural studio. We're doing some fit out work for whisky distilleries in the Highlands and the Islands of Scotland. We're working on rock and roll projects, and we're also working on the ABBA experience down in Pudding Mill Lane, which is soon to be opened in London. So there's a lot going on, but we are always open to new projects. So if anyone who's been listening today has an idea that they want to talk to us about, then please get in touch. We're always delighted to meet new people and discuss difficult projects.
So it remains me to say that thank you so much, Tim. We have running out of time today, and we will be closing session. A huge thank you to you personally for taking the time out of your busy schedule. You've just outlined to us amazing things that you're going to be doing. Looking forward to it. Thank you for giving us the experience of our Wasl Plaza. I genuinely think it's a huge achievement. The one thing that you have left me with today is you designed a theatre without knowing what the show was going to be. Well, I can tell you, whatever you designed at first, it has been a true success as coming from those comments. So thank you and congratulations for all your work at Wasl Project. And I'm sure you can do more amazing works. And we're very much looking forward to hear what you've been doing in the future as well. So do keep in touch. For our audience, it remains me to thank you for joining us today on your lunch break if you are in Gulf. Just a reminder to you all, if you would like to join our RIBA, please email the contacts listed in the chat bar and send in your email address, and we are here to help you. On that note, do take care of yourself, stay safe, and see you at the next live lunch talk. Thank you.